Hi everyone, welcome to Chapter 2 on Organizational Behavior. And now that we understand the concepts of organizational behavior, let's take a dive into understanding what makes individuals who they are, why your employees behave in different ways, and also to learn more about why you do the things that you do. So to start this chapter off, I like to use the Mars model as our first learning objective in this class, and you'll reference the Prezi slides in here. I think it's a fantastic tool to diagnose why employees are always, why they're being productive and what in cases they are not. Too often, more than not, we seem to always blame the employee for performing poorly. In many cases, it's often the situation, training, or the organizational failure of some sort. It's a really useful tool to understanding the root issues that cause an employee to underperform in the workplace. And the Mars model is really just an acronym of the MARS, which stands for the motivation, ability, role perceptions, and situational factors to create the performance. So motivation is really the direction, intensity, and persistence of an employee to work towards a task. Ability is really around, do they have the skills to do the job? And make sure to watch the little video that I've attached there, lifted by Pixar. It's a great example of how we sometimes fail employees on the job by assuming that we hired an amazing candidate who can figure things out on their own. I always ask managers during the class how many of them were recently hired into the job. They were shown their workstation or office and then onboarded, and then the coworker, the new employee, is left to their own devices to figure things out. I always generally see a lot of hands being raised in the class where many people have gone through that experience with recent examples of being parachuted into their new seat in their new office and then watch staff amble away, and they struggle to turn on the computer as well as learn all the systems, processes, and how things work. And so ability can often lead to really poor performance when we really don't onboard and train employees well. And role perceptions, let's talk about that for a few minutes. The R of the Mars model. So we've talked about M, A, and now let's talk about the R of role perceptions. I wanted to share a quick stat in there that shows 6 out of 10 employees do not understand their job responsibilities. So most employees actually in Canada do not understand their role description. We do a terrible job of keeping job descriptions up to date in the workplace in Canada. Organizations are changing so fast, and so a lot of the job descriptions that we hire for are so old that they're no longer relevant in the workplace. And so role perceptions cause a significant problem in terms of workplace productivity because employees just don't know what they're supposed to be doing or what their current goals are. I have a little Dilbert cartoon with Tina the tech writer as a great example that I'd like to show you. Is that, Dilbert talks about, the boss comes in, I decided to base your salary on the number of pages that you write. Fine, Tina says, I'll give you a high volume of low quality work. And that's a great example of how in many cases we could be asking for a performance related to the job, but actually be motivating it and describing it in the wrong way. And the fourth category, S, the situational factors of the Mars model, we see that employees can often underperform in their job largely because the fact that we haven't set them up for success with the right computer, the right resources, the right staff, the right processes to do their job effectively. And those situational factors can really get in the way of performance. But when you get these 4 factors right, you really get high-performing employees within the workforce. And when all of this is working right, you get employees that have good task performance with higher productivity and efficiency. You have employees that have great organizational citizenship behaviors, or what we like to describe in OCBs. Employees that are helpful to others. They look after each other's social and psychological health. For example, they attend voluntary events, coaching and mentoring others, covering each other's shifts, letting coworkers know of pending mistakes, for example. And they do less of counterproductive workplace behaviors, CWBs, which include things such as like harassment, bullying in the workplace, stealing or sabotaging on the job. And they join quicker, they stay longer at organizations, and 69% of, and I'll share some stats, which I'll put a link in the bottom of this video where these stats came from. 69% of employees say they'll work harder if they're better appreciated in the workplace. And we see in the research that 21% of businesses that have highly engaged employees are more profitable, and 41% lower absenteeism. So when you get these 4 factors right, you really get highly productive employees that represent a lot of profitability for the organization itself. So next time you're managing an employee who's performing poorly, apply the Mars model to correctly diagnose what that problem might be, because you might be surprised. It may have nothing to do with the employee's motivation. I think it's really critical to understand that we tend to blame the employees first and not the situation, their role perceptions, or ability. It's so much easier to assign the blame to a new employee versus take stock of ourselves as leaders and managers and realize that sometimes we made the mistake in terms of setting them up for success. And I think that's a really important life lesson, is that I remember a story about this, an example of where I was working with a friend, having coffee with them at a Tim Hortons, and they were telling me about how they were really sick and tired of this new employee that they just hired. And they weren't doing the job properly, and they were terrible, and they were just waiting, and they were blaming everything and the employee. And I was asking my friend, when I was sitting down with them for a Timbit and coffee, and said to them, can I ask you a question? And they said, yes. I said, well, what made you hire this person? And they said to me that they were the best candidate they had ever seen. And that's why they chose them out of all the candidates. They had a lot of experience, a lot of skill, a lot of background, and they weren't working out in the organization. So I said to him, like, maybe it's you. And they took it as a bit of a shock at first, but what they started to realize is that it had nothing to do with the employee's motivation when we ran them through the Mars model and explained this and described the situation. That had everything to do with ability, that the organization really didn't train them properly and onboarded them properly to do the job successfully. And so it really changed the frame of reference of my friend to think that it was no longer the employee's fault in all of this. It was actually the organization in this case. And that's why the Mars model can be very powerful, because it can really deconstruct where the real problem really lies with an underperforming employee. I think it's a great tool to accept our own failures and setting them up for success, and realize what we should be doing to really ensure that they know what they're doing on the job. Maybe it's because it's role perception, because that job description is 10 years old, for example. So we've talked enough about the first learning objective around the Mars model. Let's talk about personalities in organizations. We all have them, and we bring them to the workplace, and that's fundamental. And what I like to make sure that managers are really aware of as we go through this class is that 50% of our behaviors come from what we grew up around, and 50% is based on enduring patterns of thoughts and emotions that we're born with. So what this means is that we can't change everyone to be exactly the same, nor can we expect them to change to be completely similar from one employee to the next. So many managers have taken this class, and they've told me about experiences that a hiring manager approaches them and I always ask them to hire a person just like Sally or X, Y, and Z person. In reality, this is completely impossible until there's one day when the technology is there that we can clone employees. That may come with its own moral ambiguity, but that's another conversation. So if you can't completely change an employee because half of their personality is ingrained, let's look at how to work with employees' individual personalities. It's really funny. Isn't it funny? A lot of times we ask our HR staff to hire duplicates of employees that work out really well, when we ourselves don't want to be duplicated exactly ourselves. So, and that's just an impossible task to be asking our HR managers. And maybe someone in the class can explain this to me, or offer a hypothesis in the comments of why we do this to our HR managers all the time and ask them to recruit the exact same person again. And so what this means in organizational behavior terms is that as managers, we have to be competent in changing our management style according to different personality types in the workplace, knowing full well that we can't completely change them. So the current perspective and the contemporary management perspective is to adjust our management style according to the personalities that we have in the office. And a way to define personalities is, I like to use what you see in the slide deck is called the 5-factor model, or in other words, it's described as the canoe model. And basically hundreds of personality tests have been described over the years, and they've been organized into 5 general groups, and which is described under this canoe model, this acronym of CANOE. Conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, openness to experience, and extroversion. And what you'll see in this description is really the range of different perspectives. And I love the canoe model personally because you can generally read your employee's canoe profile by observing their behavior and identifying work that is really well suited based on their personality types. I think it's a fantastic tool. It's pretty easy to use. It's really easy to deploy, easy to categorize employees in certain personality traits, and also then use that to place them in work that makes them highly successful. I think the canoe model is really useful because you get to realize what kind of work they might be ideally suited for and place them in that work so that they look even better than they could normally. Also in this class or slide deck, you'll see that the textbook talks a lot about the Jungian personality theory. It's one of the most popular tools out there in the contemporary workplace, which was introduced by Carl Jung in the late 60s, I think, if I remember properly, and referred to the MBTI survey. You can do these surveys online for free nowadays. There's 16 different personality categories. And the tool is really good because it gives you good self-awareness and awareness of other personalities that are in the workplace. It's really a poor predictor of performance that we've seen in the research, and usually just seen as a team building tool, and really useful for career planning, and career planning, especially in the university context. And the last element, or the second last element that I really want to talk about today, is really the values in the workplace. It represents a stable set of beliefs that guide staff behavior. They're much like team norms. We tend to recruit employees that are similar to the organization's values to create the concept of values congruence, which is the concept that people will work harder and longer with an organization that matches their own personal values. And so we want to hire people that match that. But we're also seeing some of the latest research shows that getting too much of that, and you start to get too much groupthink in an organization when there's too much values congruence in an organization. And the last element of this chapter is really the concepts of culture and the concepts of cultural competency, which we heard about through Ernie Wilson's video at the very beginning of this course, which is one of the 5 key skills that managers need in today's job market. And to describe this, we use Hofstede's cultural dimensions, a really popular model that was developed in the late 60s and early 70s. It's a widely understood model to understand different cultures. It's been adapted and modified over the years, and a really good tool for understanding different cultural perspectives. What I do want to share with you in the class lecture is Erin Meyer's seminal book on cultural dimensions modernized. There's a great video from INSEAD which she talks about her book and describes how different managers work together, so please watch that video link in the Prezi slides. We'll debrief in class on some examples of cultural competence and working with different cultures. I'll give you a personal experience is that I remember working in Ghana one time and I made a mistake on cultural norms. I was sitting in a boardroom listening and presenting to this board, and they had their hands up in their faces like this, hands on their desk and looking down as they listened to me. And I thought for the life of me I had lost this board of directors, and they were just tired and falling asleep during the meeting. And I had asked a coworker and said, "What's going on?" And they said, "Oh, don't worry. That's a sign of respect that they're intently listening to what you have to say and making sure they understand you. So that's why they're doing that kind of cultural behavior." Oh, and that was a really good learning for me to understand how cultural differences occur in the workplace and how important it is to understand them, right? And we'll talk a lot about in the class lecture about how to work with different cultures. You know, in some cases, cultures work on building relationships first before tasks. And some cultures work on the job first and then focus on the relationship. And we'll talk about many different perspectives on cultural norms that are in place in the workplace and how to understand them and how to adapt your own personal leadership and management style according to these different biases. And I hope that helps give you an understanding of chapter 2. Go through the Prezi slides as we discussed, and then we'll debrief in more detail during the class lecture. And I can't wait to see you guys soon in class. Talk to you guys soon. Bye.